I would love it.
So we're going to get it started even though I bet we're going to have some people coming in at the last moment. That happens quite often here. But welcome to Bugs. For anybody that's never been here before, raise your hand. Welcome. So we are a community science lab, and that means we're a nonprofit place where people can come learn about biology. They can actually do biology hands-on. We have a lot of different classes and workshops coming up. And we also have these things called lab skill nights, where you can come in and learn a lab skill in just 2 hours. And our classes, right now we have a few coming up. We have Deadly Glow, which is a little mini microbiology class, where you learn about disinfectants and using this really cool bacteria that glows really brightly, which is nice. And that's on a Saturday in June. June 10th, we have a protein class where you're actually going to learn how to isolate and detect proteins in the lab, and it's actually a lot of fun. The postdoc or the grad student actually teaches that class, knows so much about proteins, and he really conveys he has this beautiful PowerPoint slideshow along with the hands-on work, and so it's actually a lot of fun. And that is in July, and this is a mistake, this is actually not the 29th, it's the weekend before. And then we have a really nice big class coming up, so we don't know for these bigger classes maybe 3 or 4 times a year, but these classes are about 5 Saturdays in a row, about 5 hours a day, and they encompass a bigger set of information. So this one is called Build a Great Gene, and we're actually going to use CRISPR, if anybody's heard about CRISPR in the news. It's a fun new technology, and we'll get to learn about it here. Another thing that we do is have speakers. So we're all about having people, scientists and experts from the area, come and talk to the public. And anybody's interested in specific topics. So we're really lucky that we happen to be in a city that there are a lot of institutes with a lot of smart people in them. And some of them really love talking to the public and coming and giving talks, which is fantastic. So today you're going to be learning about cognitive bias in the justice system via forensic science. And we thank you very much for coming.
Really happy to be here.
And if you have any questions about our space, becoming a member or volunteer, come see.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. Since we do have such a small, intimate crowd, I was wondering if we could just quickly go around and I can learn a little something about your backgrounds, too, and what your interests are, where you're coming from. Start with me? Sure. Put you on the spot.
I'm Walter, and I'm a member here for a couple of years now, and I'm learning about biology here, but in my real life, I do ceramic 3D printing, and a lot of research and development, developing new materials and processes, make ceramics, 3D printing.
Very cool. Good to meet you. Thanks for coming.
I'm Anna. I'm an artist, and I heard about Kukucka and this talk, which I was in when I went to MICA a year ago. So I'm just interested in biology in general.
Do you
Sure. So I'm Emily. I'm his wife. I used to tag along.
She does other things, too.
I'm Michael. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at NIDA, Institute of Drug Abuse. And we do basically human brain engineering trials that white people are doing.
Cool.
My name is Jen. I'm just about to finish up on my PhD at Hopkins.
Congratulations.
My name is Juan. I'm currently working on some
He's been coming to a lot of our lab skill nights, which is a lot of fun.
biology here. I'm another engineer myself.
Usually stay late and talk about all the nerdiest stuff ever.
It's easy to do.
Yeah.
So I'm Lisa. I'm a biology professor at Loyola, and I'm on the board here and I teach classes here I'm Kate. I've been in a crossover between arts and technology. I was concentrating from Urban Institute of Chicago doing robotic kinetic sculptures and installations. I'm really fascinated with um, the brain as much as sensors and feelings.
My name's Renee. I'm a metal sculptor, artist, primarily self-taught human, and I'm just curious and learning as much as I can and incorporating some science and biology aspects into some body of work that's coming up.
Fantastic. Everybody knows me. You get to participate.
I'm Maddie. My mom is literally just sitting right there. The only reason I really know of bugs is whenever she started, I basically just started tagging along. I'm actually an art student. I like dabbling in science, and I have since I was little because my mom's a scientist. And I literally just took a class on social psychology. So I heard cognitive psychology. I'm like, wait a minute,
There might
what?
be a few spoilers in here. Cool. Well, thank you for indulging me. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to get to know something about you all as well. As you just heard, I'm going to be talking today about cognitive bias in forensic sciences. Now, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a forensic chemist. I'm a psychologist. My interest is in, as I'll talk more about in a minute, how psychology can be applied to the criminal justice system in ways that can make the criminal justice system operate more effectively. Because if you think about it, who's in the criminal justice system? People, right? Lawyers, judges, juries, eyewitnesses, suspects, criminals, victims, are all people. And psychologists know a thing or two about people that we can use to improve how the system works in ways that hopefully mean that we make fewer mistakes. And that's kind of where I want to start, is with the problem, the mistakes that we are making. So, how many of you, by a show of hands, are familiar, at least to some degree, with the work of the Innocence Project? Okay, about a third, a half, a third. So the Innocence Project, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit legal organization that advocates for DNA testing in cases where there is a dispute over whether or not an individual was convicted of a crime that they didn't commit. So essentially, they use DNA testing to try to get innocent people out of jail. And to date, these numbers are a little out of date. They have exonerated 350 wrongly convicted people through DNA evidence. I'll talk about the graph in just a second. But it's important to point out that these are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of these wrongful conviction cases. 350 DNA cases, there are many more non-DNA cases. Anybody want to try to take a guess as to how many total cases of wrongful conviction have there been in the United States that we know of?
Too many?
It's over 2,000 now, approaching 2,100. And on average, those people spent a little over 10 years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. So we're talking over 20,000 years of innocent human life wasted in jail for things that these people didn't do. Now, as you can probably imagine, people in my position and people who I work with, we look at these cases and we ask, well, what went wrong here? How can we prevent this from happening again? How can we change the system in ways that prevents this from happening again? And in these wrongful conviction cases, we see a lot of common themes, contributing factors that lead to people's wrongful convictions. One that I'm sure you've heard about, at least to some degree, is eyewitness misidentification. Right? Eyewitnesses make mistakes. Humans aren't perfect. Memory isn't perfect. So sometimes they show in the lineup and they pick out the wrong guy. Or sometimes they interview the witness and they get the story wrong. And it can start a snowball effect that ends up with an innocent person going to jail. The kinds of errors that I'm going to talk about today are forensic science errors. Now, eyewitness misidentification and actually false confessions, which I'm also interested in, but I won't have time to talk about today, have received a lot of research attention in psychology, and consequently there's a lot of reform efforts going on to minimize the risk of these two things happening in the future. The forensic science errors, believe it or not, despite being found in almost 50% of these wrongful conviction cases, haven't received nearly as much research attention until maybe the past, I'm going to say 10, not even maybe 7 years or so is when research in this area has really started to pick up. Where, the general public, certainly, and the sorts of people who would be serving on juries in the United States, are going to come in with the impression that forensic science is infallible, right? They see it on TV, it must be infallible. They punch the guy's name into the computer, and within 45 minutes, not including commercials, they find the killer, right? Unfortunately, as I'm sure many of you know, that's not how it works in real life. So it got us thinking, these forensic scientists have a really good reputation. They've been around, they've been admitted in court for a very long time. Why, in some cases, are forensic scientists getting it wrong? Why are they making mistakes? So, to answer that question, we kind of took a journey, a century back in psychology, and started to get an answer as to why these mistakes might be happening. Now, to illustrate, I want to get you to do a little exercise. So I'm gonna split the room in half right here. I'm gonna ask everybody from here over to just close your eyes for a second. Okay? You guys keep your eyes open. I want you to just read this to yourself. Okay? Just read this to yourself. Okay, got it? Okay, now I would like folks with their eyes closed to open them. You folks close your eyes for just a second. Okay, go ahead and read that to yourself. Okay, now everybody can open their eyes. What is that?
13?
Okay, now I'm under the impression that this is a room of very smart people. Yet we seem to disagree over what this is, right?
Either or.
How so?
It's very tight 13 or a very artistic, stenciled out B.
So I'm guessing some of you maybe have seen this illusion before, right? If you surround it with numbers, it sure looks like a number. But if you surround it with letters, it sure looks like a letter, doesn't it? But the reality is, it is what it is. The stimulus is what the stimulus is. You both saw the same thing. But as a function of what was around it, you interpreted it in a different way. That tells us something very fundamental about how humans process information in their environment. So when you're presented with a stimulus, you have to look at it and make sense of it. Okay? So the first thing your brain is going to do through your eyes, you're going to just intake that information. Get the information from the environment onto your retinas, into your brain so you can make sense of it. That process is called bottom-up processing in psychology. It's just the objective intake of information from the environment into the brain. I got to get it in there if I want to make sense of it. Then once it gets into my brain, I have to say, okay, well, what is this thing? I see like sort of a black blob on paper. How am I going to impose meaning on this? That process of imposing meaning is called top-down processing. Now here's the important distinction. Bottom-up processing is the same for everybody. You all see the same thing. Top-down processing is not necessarily the same for everybody. Or it might even be different for the same person on two different occasions, depending on the context in which that stimulus is presented. So the point is, your interpretation of any stimulus is shaped by the context that it's presented in, maybe by your expectation about what it should look like, maybe by your motivation as to what you want it to look like, maybe your prior experience with similar stimuli, or things that might otherwise guide your interpretation in a particular direction. What is that thing?
It's a guy playing a saxophone.
Or a woman's face.
So my two friends on the couch, again, are looking at the same stimulus and coming away with two very different interpretations.
I saw both as well. I thought the woman would be a little bit more obvious, but
Can I ask
maybe
if
not.
you remember which one did you see first?
Probably the guy playing the saxophone.
Did anyone see the woman's face first? So again, same information, different people, different interpretation. Maybe, for example, if you are a musician, you might be inclined to see this as a person. Maybe, for example, if you are a woman, you might be inclined to see it as another woman. Maybe if you're a man, you're more inclined to see it as a woman, right? The point is, there's a degree of subjectivity and idiosyncrasy here. Not everyone is going to look at this and have the same reaction. This top-down processing introduces an element of idiosyncrasy to how we see the world around us. Now, in many cases, that can be a very beneficial thing. It helps us to process information really quickly. And, we use the experiences that we've had in a way that makes us more, mentally efficient. However, it can also backfire when we see instances of confirmation bias. This is going to be kind of the crux of what we talk about today is confirmation bias. Again, I'm guessing many of you have at least some degree of familiarity with what confirmation bias is, but just so we're on the same page, confirmation bias is a phenomenon where when we hold a belief or an expectation, without realizing it, we seek out information that confirms that belief. We interpret ambiguous information in ways that corroborates that belief. When we encounter information that contradicts that belief, we either ignore it altogether, we find ways to discount it, explain it away. The point is, our beliefs tend to be self-maintaining, right? We seek out evidence in ways that strengthens the beliefs that we already have. We're not doing it objectively. We're seeking out things that we want to hear, right, in some sense. So it's kind of neatly summarized by this cutesy little cartoon. Everything that you look for and all that you perceive has a way of proving whatever you believe. There's an element of circular reasoning to this, right? Now, I'm going to give you just a real basic example from psychology of how this plays out. This is a research study done by 2 Italian researchers about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, where they had people evaluate the resemblance of people who are photographed together. Has anybody in this room ever been told you look like your mom or you look like your dad? Or maybe if you have children, your children have been told they look like you, right?
It's weird when they say, "Are you guys sisters?"
I'm sure that's not too weird, right?
Now, here's a tougher question. Is there anybody in here who's been told that they look like their parents and you kind of go, I don't really see it? Right? You kind of think, well, I can see why you might say that, but I don't see the resemblance. The question is, do you think those people would still say that if they didn't know that you were related to this other person? They're coming into it with an expectation, oh, you're genetically related, so you must, of course you look alike, because you're genetically related, you share half of your DNA, you must be genetic, you must look alike, right? This is exactly the thing that they tested in this study. So they showed the people in this study pairs of people. And in some cases they said, oh yeah, these 2 people are related. And in some cases they said, oh, these 2 people are not related. They're just in the picture together. They're friends, or they're not genetically related in any way. Now in some cases that was true, right? In some cases that was not true. And they had people rate on a 1 to 9 scale it was. How similar do you think these people look? As it turns out, the strongest predictor of how similar people thought they looked was not whether they were actually genetically related or not. It was whether they expected them to be genetically related or not. So the striped bars are conditions in the study where they were told that the people were related. And as you can see, if I think that they're related, I'm going to see them as more similar looking, regardless of whether they actually are related or really aren't related. Expectations are very powerful. They shape how we view the world around us in ways that might even interfere with objective reality in some cases, right? We might simply see things that aren't there because we expect them to be there. Now the question is, how does this play out in the criminal justice system in a way that can be problematic? First, I want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what the forensic sciences are. When you think of forensic science, what do you usually think? What are the first things that come to mind? I have a very non-representative sample of the population here, but what comes to mind when you hear forensic science?
CSI.
CSI. What sorts of things do they play around with on CSI?
Yeah.
See, you're not speaking my language. Fingerprints.
Yeah.
There's fingerprints, and there's the other one that I know for a fact you do here. DNA, right? If you ask the average person, being aware that we probably are not the average person, right? If you ask the average person, what do you think of when you think of forensic science? They say fingerprints and DNA. The reality of it, though, is that the forensic sciences collectively are many other disciplines in addition to these two. Here's just a sampling of some of them. Microscopic hair comparison, serology, analysis of blood bodily fluids, ballistics comparison, tool marks, shoe print examination, arson investigation, blood spat, the actual analysis of patterns of blood at crime scenes, tool marks, bite marks, forensic odontology, forensic dentistry, tire tracks, believe it or not, there's a whole area of forensic science dedicated to the analysis of tire tracks, handwriting analysis. Now, when I say handwriting analysis, I'm not talking about that hokey, I'm going to infer your personality for your handwriting sort of thing. These are people who look at documents to see if they're forgeries, to look at signatures on different documents to see if they match. Maybe they would compare, for example, a ransom note against the suspect's handwriting to see if they look similar. So there's a lot of different sort of sub-disciplines under this big umbrella category of the forensic science.
And those are just the physical ones.
And these are just the physical ones, exactly. And we're starting to see too, in recent years, more digital ones, believe it or not, with collection of digital evidence, analysis of audio tapes and all these other doctored photos, all these other sorts of things that are becoming even more high tech. Now, what a lot of these disciplines, despite the fact that they're all very different. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So, I've known about the CSI effect for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, is that part of what's driving it also to become more digital to begin with? Is that?
Oh, that is a tough question.
I know. It just.
I wouldn't say that's what's driving it to become more
Kind
digital.
of like science fiction, where things existed in books.
Right, before they
became invented.
Yeah,
So
that's
I wonder
true.
if more people are interested in pursuing those as potentials because of.
That's an interesting possibility. Yeah, I mean, so just to be clear, when you say the CSI effect, you're talking about the persuasiveness of forensic evidence and the fact that people have come to sort of expect that it exists.
We have far higher expectations for technology than it actually exists because what we see on TV is.
Precisely, which is why it's called the CSI effect, right? Because and you're absolutely right. The expectations that we get from the unrealistic TV shows have real consequences in the courtroom.
I served on a jury where it made everything go.
I believe it. And I'm glad you brought that up because these sorts of pieces of evidence are routinely admitted in court. Forensic scientists will testify as expert witnesses talking about these kinds of evidence. And it does raise some important questions about do jurors find this persuasive, and relatedly, should jurors find this persuasive or not? So there's such a multitude of different domains in this umbrella category of the forensic sciences, but something that many of them have in common is that we have trained examiners, who are humans, by the way, who are comparing samples of what they call known origin and unknown origin, or questioned origin. So I have this fingerprint that I found in the crime scene. I don't know whose fingerprint this is. I have this suspect's fingerprint. I know that it matches this guy. Let me compare the two against each other to see if they match. If they do, it implies that the suspect was present at the crime scene. If they don't match, it implies that the suspect was not present at the crime scene. So, you could compare handwriting samples. I could compare tire tracks found at the crime scene against the tires on a suspect's car. I could compare, bullets fired from a particular gun against a bullet casing that was found at the crime scene. So what they sort of have in common is this goal of individualization. Can I say for sure that this sample and this sample match? Do they match each other? If so, that constitutes pretty strong incriminating evidence against the suspect. If not, it exculpates the suspect and implies their innocence. As you can probably imagine, I'm going to give you a chance to try this out for yourself in just a second. Making these judgments is really hard, right? It requires a lot of training. It's very cognitively demanding task to do this, right? Make these little nuanced comparisons of shoe prints, or these little nuanced comparisons of blood patterns, right? Very, very complex stuff. Just to give you a little taste of what this is like, I'm going to have you all be my pretend forensic examiners. Do you have any baseball fans in the room? Not a 1.
Sort of.
Is anyone enough of a baseball fan to recognize this guy? Number 7 for the New York Yankees. Name starts with an M.
Mickey Mantle.
Mickey Mantle. That is Mickey Mantle's signature. Now, let's say you have a friend who's a really big Yankee fan. You want to get your friend a really nice birthday present. So you decide you're going to give your friend a Mickey Mantle autographed baseball for their birthday. You go to the sporting goods store and you're in luck. They actually have 2 Mickey Mantle autographed baseballs in stock. Great, you're going to buy one of these for your friend. Your friend's going to love it. Here's the problem. Only one of these baseballs was actually signed by Mickey Mantle. The other one is a forgery. Which one is the forgery?
I think it's the one on the right.
You think the one on the right is fake?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask why?
I'm just looking at the M's mostly.
These second M's?
The large M's, yes.
Okay. Those certainly look different. Now remember, this is his actual signature, so you can also compare these here. Does anyone agree or disagree?
The A and TLE look really similar on the right.
Yeah, they do. As I'm looking at it.
So this looks similar
That
to
one
this.
looks. Yeah,
Yeah, I think the one on the left is.
I concur. Looking
I
harder.
actually think the one on the left is the fake.
Why is that?
It sort of looks brand new, and I'm assuming this guy is pretty old. So, and the one on the right, it might just be the lighting, but it does look like an older baseball. Also, if you look at the way he does the ends, where it's sort of like a moon shape, the one on the right has that wavy end at the bottom, whereas on the left, it's a sharp end.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a more wavy. So I feel like the one on the left is fake.
What you did is very interesting, and let me explain why. Our first gut reaction was to look at the letters, right? Look at the M's, look at the A and TLE. But after you looked at the letters and you didn't really get anywhere, you started looking at other things, right? You sort of inferred, well, Mickey Mantle played baseball in the 1960s. He's probably pretty old. If he signed a baseball, that baseball is probably pretty old. So maybe this is the real one because this baseball looks kind of brownish, right, and a little tattered. This one looks brand new. And if Mickey Mantle passed away 10 years ago, which I think he did, give or take, he probably didn't sign a brand new baseball, right? What's the problem with that, though? You're not a baseball expert. You're a handwriting expert. Your job is to look at the handwriting, not to look at other things. Even if those other things happen to steer you in the right direction, those other things might also steer you in the wrong direction. So if you look at these 2 baseballs and you come at it and you say, well, this has got to be the real one because it's brown, that expectation is going to shape how you interpret the handwriting. Your job is to interpret the handwriting. It's not to interpret the baseball. As it turns out, in this case, if you relied on that outside information, it happened to lead you to a correct conclusion. Does that make you a handwriting expert? I would argue that it does not, right? Even if there was no handwriting on these baseballs, anyone could say this one looks old and this one looks new. That's part of the problem that we're going to see in forensic science as we go through this, right? I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, how many of you found that task to be really difficult? I think we can all agree, right? That's a hard thing to do.
But you're not holding the actual object.
Also true.
So you don't
Right.
know just by looking at, the one on the right looks older, but is it the lighting?
Sure.
It could be the same, yeah. So the lens, the histogram, whatever, filter, whatever.
And it does give you some idea of how hard of a task this is. Even in this room, without the pressure of having to solve a high-profile criminal investigation, this is a hard thing to do, right? So it kind of raises the question, how good are forensic scientists at doing what they claim to be able to do? Let me tell you what we know about them. A few studies have looked at fingerprint experts. Are they able to actually do what they claim to be able to do? If you show them 2 fingerprints and we have what's called ground truth on those fingerprints, right? We know for a fact that these either did or didn't come from the same person. How good are their accuracy rates? Are they making a lot of mistakes or not really making a lot of mistakes? The good news is that these studies, by and large, show that the experts are doing a very good job. Fingerprint experts are doing a very good job. So if we show them the blue bars are the performance, the accuracy rates of fingerprint experts. The green bars are actually the accuracy rates of lay people. This particular study, they wanted to establish that fingerprint experts outperform lay people, and as you can see, they absolutely did. They're quite good at what they claim to be able to do. So if we show them two fingerprints that we know for a fact match each other, 92% of the time they will get that right. They will say, yes, these do match each other. If we show them two dissimilar fingerprints that do not match each other, 0 errors. 100% of the time they're getting it right and saying, no, those don't match. Even if we show them two non-matching fingerprints that are very similar, this is where they really, really outperform the lay people, right? The lay people effectively are just randomly guessing. They're not even outperforming chance levels of performance in this case. But the experts, again, are near perfect, 99.32%. This is good news, right? We have actual scientific empirical research showing fingerprint experts can do what they claim to be able to do. They're actually good at what they do. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. All of those other domains that I showed you on the previous slide, hair comparisons, shoe prints, bite marks, handwriting, we don't know squat about whether those people can do what they claim to do or not. There haven't even been basic validation studies in those areas to say, oh, when I give you two fingerprint or two handwriting samples, or two bite marks, or two shoe prints, can you actually tell if they're from the same person? We don't even know that. That is arguably the most fundamental question that we could ask, right? Can you actually do this? We don't know. It's very possible that they can, right? It's very possible that they're going to have equally high accuracy rates. But they haven't proven that yet. There hasn't been research to actually establish that yet. That said, it's not all good news for the fingerprint experts, because even though they're very good at these judgments, there's still a degree of subjectivity involved. Because when you study experts, those experts sometimes disagree. In the same way that you guys disagreed about the B versus the 13. We could show the same fingerprint to multiple fingerprint experts, and they might come away with very different interpretations of it. So in the data that I'm about to show you, what they did in the study was they showed the same fingerprint to many different fingerprint experts. And each of those fingerprint experts, they just asked them one simple question. They asked them to count the number of what are called minutiae in the fingerprint sample. Minutiae is an important characteristic of a fingerprint, something that's can be used in an identification, something that makes a fingerprint unique, so to speak. Very simple question. Just count the number of minutiae. How many features do you notice? Well, it's a little hard to see, but expert A, B, C, D, so these are all different fingerprint experts. Each row represents a fingerprint sample. In this sample, expert A saw 22 minutiae. Same sample, expert B only saw 9. Same sample, expert C saw 15. Same sample, expert F only saw 3. The experts are looking at the same thing and seeing different things. Some of them are seeing tons of unique features, tons of minutiae. Some of them are seeing very few. So we don't have good consistency between examiners. It gets even worse. We don't have good consistency within the same examiner. So then they went back and they showed the same fingerprints to the same person on multiple occasions to see whether their judgments were reliable over time. Are they seeing the same number of minutiae in this fingerprint on Tuesday as they did on Friday? They are not. Examiner number 1 saw, oh, sorry, this is a chart of differences. That's why I'm confused. It's been a while since I looked at this. Sorry. Saw 1 more minutia on day 2 than they saw on day 1. In this sample, he or she saw 4 more minutia the second time he looked at it than the first time he looked at it. We've got some pretty big numbers here, right? Very few zeros. if there was good consistency over time, these would all be zeros. Right? They would look at the fingerprint on Tuesday and say, that has 6 minutiae. They would look at the same fingerprint on Friday and they would say, that has 6 minutiae. Instead, in some cases, they're saying, oh, this has 2. No, actually, I think it has 10 now. It's the same thing. It's the same stimulus. So there's clearly a degree of subjectivity involved here, right? Even though, as we saw in the last slide, they're very good at what they do, there's definitely an element of subjectivity, an element of variability to it. So to kind of sum up, the research basis for most of these forensic sciences is weak, and in fact weaker than most people would assume that it is, based on how frequently these things get used and admitted in court. I'm sure you all are to some degree familiar with the National Academy of Sciences. In 2009, the National Academy of Sciences released a comprehensive report in which they evaluated, critiqued the current status of forensic science in the United States. And they came away with a very sort of pessimistic outlook on what the forensic sciences look like in 2009. Here's their takeaway message. With the exception of DNA analysis, no forensic method, none, has been shown to have the capacity to demonstrate a connection between evidence and a specific individual. You claim that you can look at these 2 shoe prints, look at these 2 handwriting samples, look at these 2 fingerprints, look at these 2 blood patterns, what have you, and say that they're from the same person. You can't. At least you haven't proven that you can. Right? That's what this is the National Academy saying. This was a panel of very, very well-renowned people doing a very, very exhaustive review of the literature, and they found swamp. It's at one point it was described as a house of cards. Right? It's very troubling that this stuff is getting used in court when there's really no basis behind, no research supporting it. That's not to say that it's invalid. It's just to say that we don't know, right? Everybody in this room likes evidence. We don't have it. We don't know one way or the other. That can create some pretty big problems. Think back to that very first slide. 47%, the actual number is actually 49% now. 49% of DNA exoneration cases have forensic science errors in them. How are these forensic scientists getting it wrong? Let's look at a case study. How many of you remember the name, this would have been almost 15 years ago now, the name Brandon Mayfield? Does this name ring a bell to anybody? Oh, good. You might remember in 2003, which was not that long after 9/11, there was a series of bombings in Madrid train bombings. You remember this, I'm sure. Dozens of fatalities, very, very sort of unfortunate event. Launched an international investigation for who is the guy who was responsible for this atrocious bombing. Well, they found a fingerprint. The fingerprint on the right here, which as you can see is heavily degraded, right? They found that fingerprint on the bag of explosives in the train that contained the detonating device that was used to detonate the bombs. So they said, okay, we have the perpetrator's fingerprint. Let's try to find this person. And they ran this, the FBI ran this fingerprint through their database, and they had their, very well-trained, very competent, very honest experts look into this evidence. And they matched this fingerprint to this guy, Brandon Mayfield. This is Brandon Mayfield's fingerprint. Okay. And they said, oh, well, these fingerprints match. Mayfield must be our guy. Mayfield must be our guy. Mayfield was not their guy. This ended up being a big, large-scale international embarrassment for the FBI. They had multiple independent FBI examiners look at these fingerprints and said, yeah, Mayfield is the guy. Turns out, Mayfield was not the guy. The guy was an Algerian national who was later identified by Spanish authorities who found his fingerprint in their database. So the question became, well, why did they think Mayfield was the guy? I mean, sure, the fingerprints look alike, but was there anything else that might have put Mayfield on their radar? Well, here's some facts about Brandon Mayfield that I didn't tell you, that the FBI knew. Brandon Mayfield had recently converted to Islam. because his wife was Muslim. Brandon Mayfield was an attorney in Oregon. He had recently represented an individual with known ties to Al-Qaeda. Now, he represented him in a child custody case that had nothing to do with terrorist activity whatsoever. But he represented a person in court who was on a no-fly list. That was enough to get Mayfield put on the no-fly list. The FBI knew these things about Mayfield when they looked at the fingerprints. So it's one thing to say, look at these two fingerprints. Do they match? Is this the guy whose fingerprint was on the bag? It's another thing to go, look at these two fingerprints. Oh, by the way, this guy recently converted to Islam. His wife's a Muslim, and he's on the no-fly list because he represented a known Al-Qaeda sympathizer. What do you think that's going to do? Right? How do you think that mindset is going to influence the fingerprint exam? After this, thankfully Mayfield was never convicted because Spanish authorities, caught the mistake and were able to identify the actual perpetrator. But after this news broke, the FBI was very embarrassed. They did an exhaustive review of, how could we have prevented this mistake? How did this happen in the first place? And they actually used the phrase cognitive bias in that report to explain why they became fixated on Mayfield's fingerprint. Because they had all this other information about him. They knew what color the baseball was. Right? They weren't just looking at the fingerprint in and of itself. They were relying on this other outside biasing information that, as we saw before, can shape your expectations and change how you actually interpret the evidence. There's that top-down process that comes. Now, after this happened, researchers, obviously, this piqued our interest, and a team of researchers in England wanted to know whether cognitive bias did, in fact, maybe play a role in this era. Are fingerprint experts' judgments vulnerable to cognitive bias? Can cognitive bias lead them to make mistakes? So here's what they did. They got a sample, this was a small study, they got a sample of 5 fingerprint examiners in the UK. They went to these fingerprint examiners and they gave them fingerprints and they said, these are the fingerprints from the Mayfield case, okay? We want you to look at these and give us your opinion on them. So they told these are the fingerprints from the Mayfield case. So that's going to create an expectation that, okay, well, I know about that case, right? These prints aren't going to match each other. Here's the problem, though. Here's the twist, I suppose. The prints that they gave them weren't actually the prints from the Mayfield case. They gave them prints that the experts themselves had previously examined in another case earlier in their career and had judged to be a match. So they led them to believe that the prints did not match, that they're from this high-profile mistaken identification case, but in actuality, the participants themselves had previously said that these match. Remember, there are 5 experts in this study. How many of them do you think changed their mind? One guy who did it. 4 of the 5. Same fingerprints, different expectations. Do we know whether this judgment was right or this judgment was right? No. But what we do know is that when we presented them with the same evidence twice, and all we did was change the context in which we presented the evidence, 4 of the 5 came away with different conclusions about it. That is alarming, right? That is a big problem. If they're being influenced by information other than the fingerprints, they're going outside of their job. They're going outside of their domain. They're looking at the color of the baseball. This was one of the earliest studies of this phenomenon, but as promised, about 10 years ago is when this research really started to pick up. Now, there's so much research on it that this phenomenon has a name. We call it forensic confirmation bias. Confirmation bias as it plays out in a criminal investigation influences the course of a criminal case. It goes beyond just forensic science. Confirmation bias affects police, it affects interrogators, it affects eyewitnesses, it affects alibi witnesses, right? But we have now burgeoning evidence that forensic scientists from many different domains are all vulnerable to confirmation bias because those same findings have now been replicated with across a whole bunch of different forensic science domains. document comparison, crime scene investigation, fingerprints, of course, blood spatter analysis, forensic odontology, forensic anthropology, the analysis of skeletal remains, right? In this study, they actually misled people to think that a skeleton that was female was male and vice versa. And they misjudged the gender of the skeleton just based on their expectations. If they expected the skeleton to be male, even if it was female, they said it was male. These were all trained professionals participating in these studies. Arson investigators, even some evidence of confirmation bias in DNA analysis, believe it or not. In this particular study, they were looking at a complex DNA mixture that consisted of DNA from multiple individuals, and they were looking at judgments as to whether or not a particular suspect was excluded. Right? Could we exclude them? Their decision to exclude or not to exclude was driven by their expectations about other aspects of the case. Now, are these bad people? No. Are these incompetent people? No. But they show the same biases that everyone else should, right? Everybody does this. Confirmation bias is part of us. It's part of our brain. It's part of how we think. We can't control it. Half the time it's happening, we don't even realize that it's happening. Right? But we can't just turn it off. That's the problem. Now, oh yeah.
So when the scientists are given DNA to do analysis on it, are they actually told information about a case?
You know, that's a good question.
Idiotic to me that they actually know anything about a case if they're doing
It varies quite a bit. It varies quite a bit. I'm going to come back to that later, but since you brought it up, it's difficult to figure out where exactly to draw the line, right? Because there are certainly situations where a fingerprint expert might need a little more information than just, here are the fingerprints. They might need some other context to guide their analysis. So then the question becomes, how much is too much? You know, I would argue, for example, they don't need to know about the suspect's confession, for example. That's completely extraneous to their job. But if there's task-relevant information that might actually benefit their analysis, that might be useful for them to include.
What would be relevant? Like if you give someone DNA and it does this match, does it matter what the context is?
It varies tremendously.
Yeah, but nothing about like who, like if the suspect, if they're a victim, like anything about that.
And, you know, to your point, you kind of raise a broader question, you know, how do we figure out how much information is too much or too little? The only way to answer that question is to get a dialogue going between practitioners and scientists and psychologists and, you know, and all the players in the game, so to speak. And that's what we're really kind of taking strides toward doing now, is making sure that there is this cross-communication between psychologists and legal scholars and forensic science practitioners to make sure that we're making responsible procedural decisions. Because I agree with you. I think in some cases it's very stupid to give them that information when A, they don't need it, and B, it can only be problematic at that point. And we'll see, in fact, let's see another example of that. So, what all of these studies had in common is they gave forensic scientists from whatever domain, gave them biasing, extraneous information that implied a particular outcome, right? It implied that the fingerprints would match, or it implied that the DNA would exclude this person, or it implied that the skeleton would be female. What if we give them extraneous information that doesn't imply a particular outcome? It doesn't, you know, lead them toward a particular conclusion, but it's still something that arguably they don't need. That we use a slightly different term for that because it's a slightly different phenomenon. We call that contextual bias, because they're not really confirming anything, right? They don't really have a explicit expectation. Oh, I think this person is guilty. I think this skeleton is female, and so on, that they're trying to confirm. But as you'll see in a second, that information is still influencing them. So in this particular study, they had again trained fingerprint. These were, I think, students in a fingerprinting program had analyzed fingerprints in a case that they were working on. In some cases, in the case file, they included a picture of, this was the murder weapon, a lamp. And they asked,
one question, do you think the fingerprints match? Now, when they included the picture, just innocuous picture of the lamp, 47% of the people said, yeah, I think these fingerprints come from the same person. I think this person is guilty. In a second condition, instead of a picture of the murder weapon, they showed a picture of the murder victim. A gruesome autopsy photo of the murder victim. The fingerprints were the same. What do you think happened? Got that right. From 47% to 58%. Same evidence. The fingerprints didn't change. But if we include the gruesome photo in the case file, now they're more likely to think the suspect is guilty. This in no way suggests guilt. There's nothing suggestive about this. It's just a gross picture. But it's still having an impact on the people looking at the evidence. So it does raise the question, why are we giving people stuff that they don't need if that extra information, that extraneous information, can be problematic? As this research continued to gain momentum, this was last fall 2016, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, PCAST, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, released a report on forensic science. So sort of a sequel, in some sense, to the National Academy of Sciences report from 2009. And again, they critically reviewed the state of the forensic sciences as of last year, but they did it in a more sort of forward-thinking way. How are we going to make these methods better? Right? How can we improve procedures? And here's their takeaway message. Because contextual bias can influence experts' decisions, we should take measures to address that. For example, not exposing them to that information. It's pretty straightforward, right? If they don't need this information, and that information is problematic, don't give it to them. We do this all the time, right? Everyone, all the scientists in this room, double-blind studies, right? It almost goes without saying that we're going to do double-blind research because we know that having those expectations is problematic. We know that if the experimenter knows what the hypothesis is, that could be problematic. We know if people know which condition they're in, that could be problematic, right? What PCAST recommended is, why isn't forensic science adopting the same model as every other science? Why are they seemingly lagging behind everybody else? We should catch them up. We should make sure that they play by the same rules that other scientists play by. They are called forensic science, after all. Right? If we want them to live up to that name, they should obey the same rules that all the other scientists are following, that we've found for decades, if not centuries, to be really beneficial to us. The good news is that, in some cases, forensic labs, forensic examiners have really heeded this warning and taken a sort of very progressive, proactive approach to fixing this problem. The downside is, to be perfectly honest, most of those labs are not in the United States. Netherlands, UK, particularly Australia and New Zealand, forensic examiners there, they get this. They get it. They've taken steps, not universally, but certainly more so than here. They've taken steps to address this, and we'll talk about some of those steps in a little while. They've taken steps to address this problem of bias. They understand that bias is a problem for the justice system, and it's a problem for them personally, right? It undermines their own credibility. But do all examiners agree about this? I want to give you just a sampling of some of the reactions that forensic examiners in the United States have had to this line of research and the reports from NAS and from PCAST. First, we have a quote from the former chairman of the UK Fingerprint Society, a very big fingerprinting organization in the United Kingdom. He said, any fingerprint examiner who is swayed by stories and gory images is either totally incapable or is so immature that he or she should seek employment at Disneyland. So this is just outright denying that bias exists, just ignoring all of the research findings and saying, no, that doesn't happen. Well, we have a bunch of research showing that it does happen. Now, in his defense, I guess, when he made that statement, a lot of that research hadn't been published yet. But even so, we have the evidence. You can't really deny that it happens. We know that it happens. We've seen it not only in the lab, but we've seen it in hundreds now of real-world cases.
So recent was suggesting there's different examiners and some might be more prone to cognitive bias than others. Is there any evidence for that? That some people are more or less?
Very good question. To date, not that I'm aware of. There have been a few studies that have looked at years of experience as a predictor variable, but they did not find any sort of reliable effects. I would personally, if I had $1 million from NSF to do this, I would be interested to see whether there are any psychological variables that predict, things like need for closure, things like need for cognition, which shows as a measure of the extent to which you enjoy effortful cognitive activities. There's sort of an interesting paradox with that one where people who have a higher need for cognition tend to actually be more vulnerable to bias. You would think they would be less vulnerable because they're more meticulous, but their meticulousness is sort of a double-edged sword because it helps them find evidence that they're looking for. You see what I mean? But the short answer to your question is no, there hasn't been any research on individual differences in that respect yet. That would be really interesting to look at. And this is by no means an isolated quote. I did cherry pick this quote, obviously, because it's funny. But this isn't by no means isolated. I've had countless people express this to us in one medium or another, that they just don't see this as a problem. They don't believe bias is an issue. We have others that say, well, even if bias is a problem, it's kind of worth it. Right? This is previous chair of the scientific working group on friction analysis, fingerprinting organization in the United States. Investigators want to read investigative reports because it allows them to enjoy their jobs. It doesn't actually alter their judgment, but many of the tasks that we do can be tedious and mundane. And so, yeah, we might put innocent people in prison, but do you really want us to be bored at work? That's kind of the argument here, right? And this is published, so I can cite this forever, and I'm really happy about it. This is obviously a really absurd thing to say, right? I'm sorry that you don't like your job, but if we take a step back and look at our priorities, this is a big issue that we need to address. A third sort of camp of people falls into the category of what I'm going to call bias is a good thing, right? Contamination does not necessarily lead to an increased error rate and may actually improve the accuracy of their conclusion. Okay, I guess. If I give you a suspect's fingerprint and a fingerprint from the crime scene, and I tell you that the suspect confessed to the crime, and based off of that information you say, okay, then the fingerprints must match? Yeah, that could, I suppose. Knowing about the confession could lead you to a correct conclusion, incidentally. That doesn't make you a fingerprint expert. It makes you someone that can understand that, confession typically implies guilt. So there's no sort of unique expertise about that. That's the problem with this argument. If it does lead you to the correct conclusion, it's because the blind squirrel just happened to find a nut in that situation. This isn't a product of your own expertise. This is a byproduct of something else that just happened to point you in the right direction.
How often do you get a false confession?
Sorry?
How often do you get a false confession?
Oh, how much time do you have? The short answer is more often than you would think.
So by that logic, this is terrible.
Yes, it makes it even worse, right? Absolutely. And in fact, without getting into too much detail, we actually see a lot of forensic science errors in false confession cases because the forensic scientist will be made aware of the confession that is false, but of course he or she doesn't know that it's false. That influences their judgment, and now we have evidence that appears to corroborate the confession, but it actually doesn't. So the false confessions tend to sort of spawn other evidence that corroborates it, including forensic science evidence. A lot of issues with that. So by no means is this falling on deaf ears, but on the other hand, they haven't exactly been entirely universally receptive to it either. And I think this is kind of where we're at right now is how do we communicate with this group in a way that conveys that we're not trying to be critical We're not trying to tell you how to do your job. We're not trying to tell you that you're bad at your job. We're trying to tell you, look, we have this research that says this about things that you could be doing different, and doing this is really going to be beneficial for everybody, including you. Right? Selling them on that, saying, look, this is not only helping innocent people, stay out of trouble, this is also helping the justice system have more confidence in your work. Now, to prove that these aren't just isolated incidents here, we went out and did a survey. This is fairly recent. This isn't even published yet. Of 403 forensic examiners from 21 different countries. So a very large-scale survey of forensic examiners. We wanted to get a better sense of what forensic scientists actually think about bias. I don't, unfortunately, have time to get into all of the interesting findings from the survey, but there is one or two that I definitely want to highlight. We asked them a series of 3 parallel questions to gauge their belief about the scope of bias. Okay? How big of a problem do you think bias is in the forensic science? So the first question we asked them was, do you think cognitive bias is a problem in the forensic science as a whole? And this is sort of encouraging. 71% of them said, yes, I think it is a problem overall. It is a problem. Then we asked them, do you think that cognitive bias is a problem in your domain? What do you think happened?
Yeah.
It went from 71 down to 52. Then we asked them, do you think that you personally are influenced by cognitive bias? And it went down to 26. So it's a problem for them, but not for us, and certainly not for me, is the prevailing attitude, right? There's a name for this in social psychology. It's called the bias blind spot. We recognize that other people are biased, but we don't recognize that we have the same biases that we see in other people. That's what's going on. Yeah, oh yeah, they're definitely influenced by that stuff, but me, no, definitely not.
Is there a breakdown in more demographic information having to do with, like, are some countries better at admitting?
Unfortunately, most of these were actually from a majority, I think 60-some% were from US and the UK. So we didn't have really great data to do an international
because
comparison.
the US and UK were particularly bad at it, where
Right.
some countries do come from a more philosophical kind of.
On that note, and this doesn't exactly address your question, but something else that we looked at with these data was whether or not these people had received prior training in cognitive bias. And perhaps not surprisingly, well, for starters, I should preface this by saying these 403 examiners, about 50% of them had received education in confirmation bias, which may be unrealistic. Right? That this may be an unrealistically highly educated sample of people in terms of the phenomenon that we're asking them about. That said, we then went and compared these numbers between the trained and the untrained examiners, and the untrained examiners who hadn't received any sort of education, any sort of seminar on confirmation bias, even something like taking a psychology class, showed a much stronger, more pronounced decrease here. There, I want to say it was something like only 12% of them were saying that they personally were vulnerable to bias. So maybe this sheds some light on why the reform efforts have been slow to catch on. Everybody thinks it's a problem, but nobody thinks it's a problem for them, so everyone's kind of looking at each other, waiting for them to do something about it, and then nothing gets done. Kind of makes sense when you think about it that way. Another key finding that we had from this survey is we asked a number of questions about, well, what do you think is the best way to address cognitive bias? Right? Do you think this is an effective strategy? Do you think this is an effective strategy? And so on. The strategy that they thought was most effective was just trying not to be biased. I mean, seriously. The item read something like, examiners who make an effort to not be biased will be less biased. And 70-some% of them agree with that item. So they don't understand how bias works. So I think a big next step, and again, this is something that we're working on now, is just increasing education about this issue. Because when we talk about bias, they tend to interpret it as an ethical issue, right? They see stories like this in the news and they say, oh, well, they're accusing me of being biased. They think I'm dishonest. They think I'm a crooked forensic examiner. No, that's not what we're talking about. Confirmation bias, cognitive bias is not an ethical issue. It's not a competency issue. It's not an honesty issue. It's a psychological issue, right? Most forensic examiners, now there are, bad apples out there, sure, you see them in the news from time to time, there's been a few in the news recently. Most of them are not dishonest, careless, or incompetent, but they are human. They have brains, they're subject to the same biases that we are all subject to, right? Communicating that to them is important because we don't want them to get defensive and think that we're telling them that they're bad people or doing a bad job. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that they are people, not bad people, just people, like everyone else.
Some of the ethics are not just that, they're saying the medical examiner is dishonest, but if I say, yeah, I'm subject to bias, maybe some of those 1,000 fingerprint cases I've done in my past, I'm responsible for falsely convicting somebody. And so it's kind of taking responsibility for...
I agree. I think it's a big step towards recognizing it's very possible that I've made a mistake at some point. Yeah, and that's, as you can imagine, a very hard thing to swallow.
There's also an unrealistic expectation that science is perfect, and that because you're scientific, that you're not going to make a mistake. How many times have eggs been bad for us? and are they good for us again? I lost track.
You're absolutely right. And it kind of gets back to the CSI effect that we were talking about before, right? Do fact finders, jurors, judges, etc., have realistic expectations about this or not? Do forensic examiners have realistic expectations about this or not? Now, one other sort of neat thing I'm going to show you really quickly. They are not incompetent. They are experts, right? As we saw with the data from the fingerprint examiners, they're good at what they do by and large, right? However, and there isn't a whole lot of data to back this up, so I should preface this, but there are a smattering of studies from other domains and some reappropriation of theories here and there, suggesting that there's a paradox here. Being an expert might actually make you more vulnerable to bias, believe it or not. Being an expert might actually make you more vulnerable to bias. To test this theory, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a sentence. I'm going to give you about 5-10 seconds to read the sentence. I want you to count the number of times that the letter F shows up in the sentence, okay? Okay? How many F's were there? 3, 6, 4, 3, 5, 3. Why can't we agree on this? We're just counting letters, right? As it turns out, there were 6. But most people, without fail, will count 3. Why? Because you skip of. Why do you skip of? Because A, it sounds like a B, of, it's not off, right? And B, in all of your experience with the English language, you've learned that of is kind of a relatively unimportant word, right? So you just kind of skip over it. Is that what you did?
Well, there's also the fact that it's at the end of the word, and in psychological studies, the things you remember at the most are the things at the very beginning and the things at the very end. So if you're looking at O, it's only 2 letters, but you're going to remember the O, you're not going to remember the F.
That's very possible, right? Most people will look at this and see 3 F's. If you show this to a kid who's just learning how to read, they'll see 6. Because they don't have the expertise that we all have with reading, with the English language, right? This is a situation where the expertise kind of backfires on us. Normally, skipping the word of makes us very quick and efficient readers and helps us process information. But it can backfire. The same sort of thing happens to forensic examiners. If I've looked at tens of thousands of fingerprints in my career, I've learned what things to look for and what things not to look for, what things are important, what things aren't important. So that might lead me to gloss over some stuff that I think maybe is not so important, when it might actually be pretty important. So even expertise, and you see this with across all domains, by the way. There's a whole area of psychology on the psychology of expertise. It's really interesting. You see this with pilots, for example, right? An expert pilot is more likely to miss important information because they have so much experience that they just kind of gloss over things after a while. But we also know that confidence increases with experience. So there's a weird paradox here, where the more experienced you are, the more confident you're going to be in your own judgments, but also maybe the more vulnerable to bias you're going to be. Kind of makes for a deadly combination of things, perfect storm of weird psychological phenomena interacting with each other. So the question is, how do we fix the problem? Okay? I mentioned before that survey we found that a sizable majority, over 75% of the examiners in that survey, thought that the best way of overcoming bias was to just try not to be biased. Just be honest, make an honest effort to set aside your expectations. However, and we know this from decades of psychology research, that doesn't work. Bias operates unconsciously. It operates automatically without us realizing that it's happening. It's not a light switch that we can just flip it off, right? We need systemic procedural intervention to fix these problems. We can't just choose not to be biased. So getting back to your question from earlier, why do we keep giving them this information if we know that it's harmful to them, right? If we know that it might create bias? Well, there is now a protocol, and again, this is catching on more so in Europe and Australia and New Zealand, called linear sequential unmasking. The way this works is it regulates the flow of information that's given to a forensic examiner in a way that minimizes the risk of bias. So they'll actually have them evaluate both samples in isolation first. So you're going to look just at the known sample first, then you're going to look just at the question sample before you even compare them against each other. Then you can make a comparison. Then, if there's any information that we decide is relevant to the task, then you can have that information. And at every point along the way, you are carefully documenting your analysis so that we can see if and when and how you changed your mind in light of this new information that you got. Any information that is deemed irrelevant to the task, you don't get it. You're blinded to it, right? So there's an element of blinding here that we're all accustomed to seeing in other branches of science. Is finally being incorporated into forensic science. Here's another sort of more radical and novel idea that a few people have proposed, but there isn't really any data to support it yet. But in theory, it makes sense. When an eyewitness is making an identification, we show them what? You've all seen this on TV, I'm assuming. You show them a lineup of people, right? And why do we show them a lineup of people? Does anybody have a guess as to why don't we just show them one person?
Because if you just show them one person, they're going to be like, that's obviously the person. Whereas if you do the lineup, it's like, it could be one of any of them.
If a police officer comes up to you and says, is this the person that you saw? You are likely to infer, well, why would you be asking me this if you didn't also think that that was the person? You must have good reason to think that that's the guy, therefore I should probably think that that's the guy, so I'm going to say yes. Even if I'm not sure, right? Follow the logic there? It's sort of inherently suggestive to do it that way. So instead we show them a lineup. The other advantage of showing them a lineup is one of the people in the lineup is a suspect. The other 5 people are what are called fillers. We know that those people are innocent. So if the witness makes a mistake, we can catch that mistake. We can say, oh, you picked officer so-and-so, you obviously got it wrong. Right? If we show them the one photo and they make a mistake, we have no way of catching that mistake. There's no way to discover that they've made a mistake. So why not do something similar with forensic evidence? Think about it. If you're a fingerprint examiner and a detective sends you a fingerprint from the crime scene and a fingerprint from one suspect, look at both of them and say, well, why would these guys send me the suspect's fingerprint unless they must have other evidence against this guy? So I'm going to infer that this guy is guilty, even if I'm not so sure. I'm going to say, yeah, you know. It sort of creates an inclination toward incriminating judgments. Why not instead say, this is a fingerprint that we found at the crime scene, and here are 6 fingerprints. One of them belongs to the suspect. I'm not going to tell you which one, but can you go ahead and compare this one against each of the other 6 and tell me which of these 6, if any of them, matches this? That way, if they pick Officer Johnson's fingerprint, we know that this expert didn't do a good job. We know that this expert made a mistake. Right? That's a critical component of getting this evidence admitted in court. These sciences need documented research that demonstrates their error rates in order to be admissible in court. And as we saw before, a lot of these forensic sciences, we don't have any basic validity research on them, so we have no idea what their accuracy rate is, no idea what their error rate is. So a sort of secondary benefit of using these evidence lineups would be it actually will give us a sense of what their accuracy rate is, right? If I'm a shoe print expert and I'm only getting, the judgment right 17% of the time, I am not a shoe print expert, am I? I'm just randomly guessing. So it tells us something about their ability to do this. It also arguably inoculates them against bias. If I know that the suspect confessed, but I don't know which of these fingerprints belong to the suspect, the confession presumably is not going to have as much of an influence on me. So there's multiple benefits here. Now there's going to be logistical challenges too, right? How do we build these lineups? Who builds these lineups? The good news there is that the eyewitness identification research literature has given us about a 30-year head start on that. Because, this research, as I mentioned before, is relatively new. Eyewitness identification research has been going on since the early 1970s. So we have a big head start in terms of, well, how do we construct a lineup? How should we instruct this person? Who should administer the lineup? How should we collect their judgments? All these other sorts of things. If we can sort of adapt forensic science practices, model them after the eyewitness literature, we might be onto something here, right? We know that the eyewitness model has been working pretty well in recent years. Maybe we could learn from our mistakes and apply those lessons that we learned to a new domain.
Isn't there such a bias here that if you're giving just the suspect at the crime scene, you're saying, do these match, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing it this way, you're saying, which of these 6 is the match?
Mm-hmm.
You're not letting the person say there's no match here, right? There's a bias that one of these matches, and so that means that the other 5 have to be really close. I mean, they've got to be good comparators.
I'm glad you brought it up. So one of the most important elements of an eyewitness identification procedure, and this is something that you may not necessarily see on TV, although I have, to their credit, seen some shows do this. How you instruct the witness is very important. So what you just gave would be, in the research literature, what we would call a biased instruction. If I go to an eyewitness and I say, which of these 6 guys is the guy, they're going to pick somebody, right? So in recent, not even that recent, in the past maybe 20 years or so, eyewitness researchers have figured out that it's critical to include in the instructions, make it very explicit to the witness. None of the above is a perfectly acceptable answer. And when you include that in the instructions, you see their accuracy rates go up. So when you explicitly say to the witness, which of these 6, if any of them, is the guy, it's very possible, or it's possible that the guy is not here. And that's okay for you to select the 7th option, none of the above. That is a good illustration of one way in which the eyewitness literature gives us a head start in this respect. Right? We know that instruction is really important so that we don't get that, we don't just move the bias from one direction to the other.
That increases the workload of the experts, though.
It increases the workload. There will probably be some fiscal difficulties. I'm guessing it will be costly in some places. However, the adoption of something like this would be easy in a domain like fingerprinting, for example, because they already have access to a large computerized database of fingerprints. So, in some domains, yeah, it's going to be really difficult, right? In handwriting identification, for example, how are we going to get the other 5 signatures? Who's going to write them? How do we make sure that they're, comparable, right? How do we make it a fair lineup? But with fingerprinting, adopting something like this would be very easy. In fact, this isn't, frankly, all that different from what they do now. I'm going to jump ahead here. They use, in fingerprinting, they use a database called APHIS, where when you run the fingerprint in the computer, it generates a list of possible matches. But then the ultimate identification decision is made by the human, it's made by the person. The problem with APHIS is it not only gives you a list of potential matches, that would be good, right? That's kind of like Reliance. It's maybe one of these 6. The problem with APHIS is that it rank orders them. And which one do you think people are most likely to pick? Numero uno, right? And again, there's actually been research done on this, where they could take the same fingerprints and just flip around the order, and they're more likely to pick whichever one is listed at the top. They let the computer do the thinking for them. But if we, say, generated the top 6, and then we randomized the order, that would be a lineup. And that would be something that would be very easy for them to adopt. So, I don't want to sound overly optimistic about this, because there definitely are going to be some logistical challenges to, we're not just going to go in overnight and have evidence lineups, by next week. But in some domains, the adoption will be a lot easier than in others. And I would argue that it's worth the extra trouble in light of all of the possible benefits that it would bring. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to stick around and chat and answer some questions or what have you again. Sure.
This is back a few minutes with the lamp and the I was wondering if there was any just like neutral attempt for a neutral identification. So there was the attempt for identification given something really anodyne like a lamp, and then there was the attempted identification with the gruesome image. But is it possible that, so the assumption is that the gruesome image is falsely pushing the positive identification up. Is it possible that the anodyne image is falsely pushing it down? Has there been any comparison to like a totally neutral, no information?
That's interesting. I don't believe they did that. I don't believe they had a neither photo condition. Right.
Or just nothing.
Or just nothing. Yeah. I don't know that they did that. I think that's interesting. You're right. We don't necessarily know which one is the baseline, I guess. Yeah. So that would be an interesting question. It's funny. The research. There's a couple other studies on that contextual bias. I'll jump back to it while we're talking about it. There are a couple other studies have actually, believe it or not, found the opposite. So the theory, and this is somewhat speculative, is that in some cases it might spark a sort of reflex for retribution. This is a bad crime, so we better get the guy, so I better say it's a match. In other cases, people have argued that when the identification rate actually decreases, it increases feelings of accountability. This is a serious crime, I better not screw this up. And I would hate to put an innocent person away, so I better err on the side of caution and say it doesn't match. So we don't have nearly as good of an understanding of contextual bias yet as we do with confirmation bias, because we have had weird conflicting results here. And it doesn't help that there's only been, I think, 4 or 5 studies of contextual bias, and they've been done in different countries and different forensic domains with different levels of experience, so they're not even directly comparable to each other. So there's a lot of work left to be done with the contextual bias stuff. But in either case, we are seeing a difference. So it is affecting.
Do we have any data on if people went from one way to the other, or do we all assume they all went up? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, so we assume that more people, and we're including the original ones, all of a sudden saw more, but did it go the other way?
These are 2 separate groups. Sorry, just to be clear. So these aren't the same people.
Okay.
This is in one group. This was the identification rate, and then the identification rate in the other group. So they weren't actually in this study. They weren't actually changing their judgments over time. It was just everything else in the case file was identical, other than this one photo.
Okay.
Sorry, I was unclear about that.
Okay, so we've spoken about bias in the legal field, potential solution, or health. Ultimately, we all listen to the news and advertising. I'm sure that we all have our own biases. What can we do as a general, so are there some general things?
That's a fantastic question. I think, the number one step is just increasing awareness of this problem, increasing education about it, so that, people have a more realistic understanding of the issue and they understand, even something as basic as understanding that bias is inherent to humans, right, would be a huge step forward if we just have people sort of understand that, and in a non-judgmental way, right, understanding that everyone does sort of is influenced in these ways, but that doesn't make you a bad or unintelligent or immoral person.
And as you said, but it's not a conscious thing. It's like you can't just tell yourself, don't be like. I think the example of don't eat a polar bear.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not just something that you can't like consciously tell yourself.
You can't turn it off. Yeah. Absolutely. So
this is so. Yeah. So that's just something that you
that's the world. I mean, yeah, we made it this far, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there isn't a good way of sort of turning this off. I mean, one of the next steps I think in this research also that we need more data on is does educating people about bias make them less biased? My gut tells me that the answer is going to be no. Prior psychology research in other domains tells me that the answer is going to be no, but that's still worth demonstrating. Because I think, and we again have some data from the survey that suggests this, I think the common belief among forensic examiners, so if I'm aware of the problem, then it's not a problem anymore. Not necessarily, right? You're aware of the problem, that's great, but now you need to do something with your awareness, not just kind of rest on your laurels and say, oh, I know this is the problem, so I'm good. So that's another sort of big step forward that's waiting to be taken.
So are they going, in public health, we do these kinds of things all the time. We're changing perception and awareness and education, and it really does have a huge impact on how things are done in medicine today. Do you know who Park Dietz is, I assume?
I do not, actually.
Okay, that's it.
Okay.
I had a speaking talk with Hopkins a few years ago, actually. But a number of years ago, I was sitting next to him on a plane on my way to Minneapolis, and we started talking about bias, but in a different context, which has more to do with not believing women culturally. I totally lost my train of thought.
No worries. I'll come
Oh,
back.
public health perspective.
Yeah.
So we know that this works really well, but we also know that bias works, like we see the CSI effect happening. We know that we can prevent kids from starting smoking now. Like there's different things that we can do to help influence a cultural shift and change. And a lot of biases are very much influenced by the media. Images, pictures, how things are talked about, who gets supported versus who gets not supported. Like to me, that seems far more invaluable is to kind of look at that as a model.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, any sort of publicity and communication outreach is going to be useful.
I mean, public health, the perspective is how do you help shift public awareness and consciousness to begin with.
I see. Yeah.
Rather than, because it's got to start from the ground up.
Right.
So we do teach medicine in a different way now, because in the 80s and 90s medicine that was talking at is about status, power, it's very much like I can't be wrong because I'm the authority. But how do you shift it into, okay, so the patient's actually the expert, how do you get them to open up about stuff? Like it's shifted But when it was about status of power, people learned to distrust medicine. And we're still feeling that that's the best way
Sure.
because it's a cultural
Yeah.
issue. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, it's very much
that raises a
philosophical,
much broader
much
and deeper
bigger
problem. Yeah. To their, I mean, I don't know that this exactly gets at what you're saying, but to their credit, I will tell you that the American Academy of Forensic Sciences has been very receptive to this recently, and they've given this issue a lot of publicity at their recent annual conferences, so that they are kind of trying to instill a culture among the practitioners of this is a relevant consideration. This isn't just a fringe group of researchers that found some wacky things that are trying to impose on us. They're sort of giving it their stamp of approval, so to speak, by having keynotes and symposia and other sessions on these topics specifically, sort of giving it their blessing to make it more mainstream.
Yeah, and it's in movies now and TV shows.
Oh, yeah.
And it is more mainstream. And I actually find that there's a different problem going on because of that, which has to do with crimes that happen more commonly in our communities. The victims are not being believed and supported. It's like everyone wants to believe that the authorities are all wrong.
Right.
Like we're totally culturally becoming this anti-authority. All medicine is bad. All cops are bad. All, you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden the bias is going in this really weird, which is also dangerous.
Oh yeah.
Like it's kind of.
I mean, I think I'm preaching to the choir on this aspect, but we want evidence-based practice, and that's kind of what our goal is an evidence-based practice. Yeah.
Two questions. So one is, how is this compared to something like racial bias, where people are, where it doesn't seem to be quite so subconscious, like people seem to be a little more aware of it. And then on the same token, how does this apply to like the police with profiling, and maybe like the public is perceiving what the police do, but is there some level of unconscious bias that people are not taking into consideration?
Two tough questions. I will tell you that these are both confirmation bias and implicit racial bias are both comparable insofar as they're automatic, unconscious, things, the sorts of things that we can't just turn off like a light switch, and do have a real influence on our judgments and our behavior. In terms of perceptions of police, I mean that's a big one. Can you be more specific about what exactly?
I mean, I was just curious in general because there's this way, right, of the idea of brutality and the idea of bad apples versus what is what is just systematic versus
I mean, having done work with in the forensic sciences and then also with police officers separately, in some other lines of research that I have, I do see some interesting similarities between those two populations. Particularly in terms of their receptiveness to reform, their the need to communicate with them in a way that is constructive and not accusatory or not derogatory at all. One example that I kind of comes to mind is something else that we've been advocating for recently. I bring this up because you asked about false confessions earlier. We're starting to see more and more research showing that the practice of recording interrogations is a very beneficial one for a number of reasons. It's not only beneficial to the suspect for obvious reasons, it also deters police misconduct, but it also reaps direct benefits to the police officer himself. It protects the police officer against allegations of misconduct. It enables them to focus on the interview rather than on taking contemporaneous notes while they're interviewing the person. It allows them to go back and review the tape maybe for details that they initially didn't catch. Yet there are still, in the same way that we have some resistance here, there's still pockets of resistance in the policing community to the practice of videotaping interrogation. So in the same way that we see this sort of funky disconnect within the forensic sciences between the examiners who have sort of more progressive views on bias and are taking proactive measures to address it, as opposed to those that don't think it's an issue at all. We see the sort of same thing in the police community
we videotape interrogations and I love it, I think it's great practice, I think it's really beneficial, versus no, absolutely not, we don't need to do that when I'm doing that. So I'm not sure if that exactly gets at your question or not, but there are definitely parallels there, I think, in terms of their receptivity to, again, it all comes back to evidence-based practice, are they receptive to this sort of stuff?
Like, racial bias seems to be less
I'm sorry?
like subconscious than these types of bias. Like, I don't know. I just
I would
like
argue
my
that they're not, actually.
It's like straight up.
So can I just build on this question? So,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, if have there been any studies that have directly examined conscious biasing, where the person is told this should be this, versus a more unconscious thing? Is there one more pronounced than the other? If that's the case, can we go in the opposite direction?
That's a very good question. There hasn't, to my knowledge, been any sort of attempts to demonstrate a more explicit, overt bias effect. Because as you can imagine, logistically, that's just a hard thing to study, right? As soon as the person becomes suspicious of the experimenter's intentions, they're going to behave in all sorts of wacky ways. But that would be a very interesting question, I think, to see, can we sort of tease apart when this is happening unintentionally and when this is maybe being done in a more motivated, consciously motivated way. Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be fantastic to know, sure.
Part of science is uncertainty and probability statistics, right? I haven't mentioned that and how that plays into these kinds of studies. Like, if the evidence, if you're trying to match a fingerprint and there's a lot of uncertainty, then any little other information can bias you more easily.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But if there's lower uncertainty, then biasing maybe doesn't just less.
That question we do have some data on. There's been at least 3 or 4 studies that come to mind. I'm sure there are others that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, that have manipulated the degree of ambiguity in the evidence. Right? If I give you 2 fingerprints that clearly are from different people, presumably no amount of biasing information is going to make you say, oh yeah, those match. But when there's ambiguity, when the prints are similar, when maybe, as you saw in the Mayfield case, when one of the prints is degraded, right, so we don't have perfect information on all of its features, then there's more room for bias to operate because the judgment's going to be more subjective. Now, unfortunately, in the real world, we rarely get, especially with things like fingerprints, you rarely get 2 perfectly clear pieces of evidence, so that element of ambiguity oftentimes is there. There is somewhat of a safety blanket for that. When in a lot of these domains, it's not just do they match or don't they can say, well, these 2 pieces of evidence are inconclusive, or they're not high enough quality for me to render a judgment that I'm comfortable with. So the examiners can kind of take refuge in that third option and say, I don't want to say yes or no here, so I'm just going to deem these inconclusive so that I don't make a mistake in either direction. But there are definitely institutional pressures to not do that also. They are trained to show certainty.
Really?
Rather than.
In DNA testing, don't the results always come with some probability, like 99.9%?
They do, and as not a DNA person, I can't really speak to that too much. But my understanding, and as NAS mentioned too, nuclear DNA analysis is light years ahead of these other forensic sciences in terms of its scientific rigor and the extent to which it's been validated. But in terms of how exactly that probability is applied, I don't know that I can answer that.
But that's never done with fingerprint analysis. We're 80%. Like, there are 22 minutia, and I'm confident that 16 of them are matches.
There usually is. So, and again, that's something that varies between, in some cases between states, in some cases between countries, jurisdictions. Lots of variability here. There is a standard that needs to be met in terms of the number of minutia that you need to match in order to be able to conclude the 2 prints match. But when you introduce that subjectivity, then all bets are off in terms of the number of.
I can feel that too.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
So in the courtroom, you can't say 80% probability because you're going to lose that case.
That's true.
So
yeah.
DNA testing, what you're thinking of is parenting, which is not a legal thing. But in court, if it's not 100%, you have to do the certainty. Otherwise,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
you would.
Even if you're allowed to,
Yeah.
even if you're allowed to present that evidence in court, there are definitely restrictions on what you are and are not allowed to say, and the sort of conclusions that you are and are not allowed to present. The expert, the judge will strike, or a good attorney would object to something that seems to be an overstatement of the probability of something. I don't know that I've given a satisfactory answer to your question or not.
So I think on your last slide, how do you fix this? Talking about confidence levels and probability of accuracy is one way. Instead of nothing is black and white.
Right, sure.
So where are you in the gray area?
Well, so, okay.
Give them that opportunity instead of either putting it in one bucket or the other.
I think I'm getting a better sense of your question now, so I'm sorry, I was a little slow on the uptake on that one. That, I would argue, is yet another benefit of these lineups. Because how often are these examiners getting feedback on their performance? Almost never, right? So they don't know how accurate they are.
Yeah.
But if you have them do a bunch of these lineups, I could actually go to you and say, you are accurate 87% of the time. And you would hope that with that information, they could then calibrate their confidence to be more in line with their accuracy, right? If they know that they're good or know that they're not as good, then they can adjust their confidence accordingly.
Bounce off that, is anybody talking about simple replication? Like, I sent this fingerprint to 5 different experts and they all said the same thing. Person sent it to 5 and he said yes and she said no.
This is going to upset the people on the screen.
The scientists are going to get very upset.
That is sometimes done. It is called, the practice is called verification.
Yeah.
So if I send 2 fingerprints to, examiner A produces a judgment, then I might send those same fingerprints to examiner B. Here's the problem. We tell examiner B what examiner A said. So what happens? Examiner B always agrees with examiner A. And that's a big problem. I know.
Professional courtesy.
Imagine the institutional pressures and the social pressures, right, to agree with this person.
Right.
I mean, so there's, that's another thing that we're kind of pushing for is what's called blind verification.
Yeah.
Kind of goes without saying, examiner B shouldn't know what examiner A said, so that we can say if they agree.
So part of it, you have to have a certain amount of comfort in your position to admit that you're not sure about
Oh yeah.
or that you're powerful. And there is like a very strong public anti-expert. And obviously in the courtroom, you're testifying for or against somebody, so there's always going to be that person looking to undercut your authority.
Oh sure.
Is there some way, are there other ways to safeguard these that to provide a safer space to?
You mean in the courtroom specifically, or
Just within the forensic science field, kind of give that bit of protection in
I had not thought about that before. That's a very good question. Yeah.
because even in the sciences, like you have to not be biased, but like you're not judged on you're typically working towards some larger goal, right? You're not, it's kind of every decision like is the decision that is made to the public right or wrong.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. I see that perspective that they would be. I mean, I think I would be reticent if I wasn't comfortable in my position. But yet to give them a way of sort of admitting that in a judgment-free, repercussion-free way, that's a good question. I don't know.
So I I work at Hopkins helping future doctors learn interpersonal skills. And one thing that we're really focused on in like how we teach medicine these days has more to do with being able to admit you're wrong. How do you disclose an error? You know, it's like you train that from the beginning in a way where that didn't exist before. So when we very much live in a culture of specialization. So if you're going to be an authority, of course you want to protect your position at the top, and you get all these.
But I think, actually, getting back to your question, I think blind verification might also kind of address that problem too. Because if examiner A says that they match, we then take those prints, show them to examiner B. Examiner B says they don't match. One of them is wrong. But do we really care which one is wrong? All we really care about in that scenario is we don't know for sure, right? So we have to go back to the investigators and say, look, we don't know. They might match, they might not. We can't help you. And that way, no one is accountable, so to speak, for that mistake. No one's embarrassed by it or feels threatened by it. So that might kind of kill two birds, at least two birds with one stone, instituting that blind verification. Yeah.
So I was wondering if there was ever anybody thinking about using citizen science for this, only because, you ever heard of Zooniverse at all?
No.
Okay, so you can train people to, like, they've done things where you recognize different types of galaxies, and you recognize even tumor tissue versus, like, so different stages of tumor, primary, secondary, tertiary, and then normal. And the idea is, they're not an expert, but they are getting a little bit of the gist of it. So if you had fingerprints, you would get, a little bit of a background of it, a training session, and then you would just go through and click, 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 click. But it's not one person that's doing it. It's thousands or even more people that are doing it over and over and over again, right? Kind of worldwide.
Yeah, this sounds great.
So you can pitch ideas to the Zooniverse. So you can go on the website and you can actually use that site as a way of getting this kind of stuff. But the idea is people love doing things like this.
Sure. Oh,
it's fun. It's like a game. They feel
Yeah, we never have trouble getting people to participate.
Yeah. But if you would do that worldwide, and the more if you have 50,000 people look at those 6 prints, that gives you a way better.
That's interesting. Yeah. I had no idea about that.
Okay, this is a weird one.
Okay.
What's going through a forensic scientist's head when he looks at 2 fingerprints? So I could see approaching it 2 different ways. One is I'm going to look for things that are the same between these 2 and match them. Or I'm going to look for things that show that they're clearly different. And I'm wondering if the cognitive bias is different if you're approaching it from looking for matches versus looking for exclusionary evidence.
No, that's a fantastic question. I can tell you in basic psychology, people tend to look for confirmatory rather than disconfirmatory evidence. Now that, of course, in the situation you described, would depend on their expectation, right? I don't know this for sure, so don't quote me on this, but I presume from what I know that they go in looking for similarities rather than looking for differences.
The linear sequential thing, if they start looking for things that would exclude prints first, if things that clearly make them different, and then look for matches.
Well, I think that's part of the strength of the linear part of the linear sequential and massive model is that they're not initially looking for either similarities or differences. They're just looking at each print on its own. What is important about this print? What is important about this print in a vacuum, and then put them together. So that, I've never quite thought about it in those terms, but that is sort of an ancillary benefit.
You started from a kind of a skeptic perspective.
Right. Oh, absolutely. People do not look for hypothesis disconfirming evidence.
Because they're not
We do not
scientists.
look at instances that would prove us wrong. We look for instances that would prove us right, generally speaking.
But have you gone through training as a fingerprint?
I personally
I mean,
have not,
they
no.
may be trained to look for different. Like we're assuming that they're looking. But if you know that the bias exists, often you educate yourself to go the other way.
Right.
So we can't know that.
No, you're right, and I can only assume that there must be a tremendous amount of variability in training too.
I mean, I can tell you just from looking at the survey data, people who call themselves fingerprint experts come from all different backgrounds, all different education levels, all different fields of study. I mean, it's
Some of them
amazing the
probably even
diversity.
wear tinfoil hats.
Very possible. So it's a hard problem to nail down because even if we could implement that training, how do we do it? Cool. Well, thank you, guys. I hope
Thank you.
This was fun. So thank you.
It was fun for us.
Everyone. And thanks for coming again.
Thank you.